haven't dropped a computer-generated art story, have we?
Yes, we have.
Throw that's been changed.
No, we have dropped that, Wayne. We have dropped 42.
Yes, Phil.
108 for bank robber, mate. Puts me about 20 under. We'll have a slow read and run a bit more of the closer range.
Righto.
15.
Camera 2 with a box for both.
10, 9,
Take 4.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
7 nightly news with Jennifer Kice.
Crisis for our hospitals held hostage by just 10 union members. Attempts to stem the flow of crew from that stricken tanker.
Coming up on 2.
Snow caps suburban hills.
3 go. Cue.
Good evening.
Live
Melbourne's
read.
trains and trams will run tomorrow. Union officials announced a breakthrough in talks with the government late this afternoon and postponed a plan to strike from midnight tonight. But there's been no break.
For students working on an assignment, newspapers might be the easiest source of news to work with. But it shouldn't be forgotten that there are many people who use television rather than newspapers to find out what is happening in our world. In this program, we go behind the scenes at Channel 7 in Melbourne to learn more about how television news is gathered and processed, and to look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of this medium. Television news gathering is similar in technique to that used for the print media. But this time, the technology is more obvious. The emphasis is on the vision or pictures. And the person in charge is called the Director of News.
Well, the biggest difference between print journalism, particularly print broadsheet journalism like The Age and a 30-minute commercial news bulletin, obviously, is time and space. And that turns into a question of priorities as well. We simply can't, on a 30-minute commercial bulletin, give the depth to particular items that we could in a broadsheet newspaper. And we do have some different priorities. Being a picture medium, it is true that pictures are going to have a very large influence on where we place an item and how much time we devote to it.
At Melbourne's Channel 7, Shane Castleman is the Chief of Staff, and like his newspaper counterparts, he is responsible for organising local news gathering.
When I come in the morning, say at 6:30, the person who sits here in the afternoon will have left a list of what things are likely to be on, what time they're happening. I'll go through the file and see all the press releases, plus use the computer for diary events. They have a list of events that are happening in the day. Listening to the radio, newspapers, all those resources are used to find out what's happening, and from that broad source of information, we then decide which stories we're going to follow up for the day.
At Channel 7, listening to the radio also includes constant monitoring of police, fire brigade and other emergency services communications. Programs from rival television stations are constantly on view, and overseas news comes in via satellite to the news department's communications room. But today, it might not be a major international story that's about to head tonight's bulletin.
Well, it's not a particularly busy news day. We've got a couple of things that are going on. We thought we had a transport strike, but that now appears to have been settled. We've got some disruption to the hospital system due to bans on linen services and things like that. Nothing outstanding, and perhaps the most interesting story of the day is perhaps the fact that it's been snowing up in the Dandenongs. You know, that Melbourne being the sort of town that it is with its preoccupation with the weather, that makes a good story on a day like today.
Well, rain, hail and snow woke Melburnians this morning. Rain-sodden streets were matched only by freezing temperatures and 2 centimetres of snow in the nearby hills. And as Simon Breer reports, school children in the Dandenongs made the most of the wintry weather.
It might be cold, but to the people in the Dandenongs, it's an event they look forward to every year. Snow, the first fall for the season. The wintry wonder blanketed the ground, much to the delight of local schoolchildren.
We need heaps more snowballs.
A central role in television news gathering is played by the journalists. Along with the presenter of the program, they are the recognisable faces that often appear in the stories they've worked on during the day.
Oh, well, the first thing, you'll come into work and see what's doing. Your chief of staff you'll work through. It's his job to assign the story and the crew, and from there it's your job to go out and round it up. So it's a case of getting to the job, sizing up what it is as far as how newsworthy it's going to be, what it's going to need, how long you're going to be there, and just what is going to happen is your job to round that up, working in with your crew and taking it from there. It's your job to fashion the story, to get the story to begin with, and then to return here and put it together so it can fit into the 6 o'clock news. Round it up in about a minute, for a minute 20 story or so, depending on what it is.
A story that can illustrate this process and seems destined for prominent coverage today is a protest organised by a group of residents in an inner suburban street. Their press release has escaped the rubbish bin and has interested the Chief of Staff enough to assign a journalist and crew to cover the event. First to arrive from Channel 7 is the camera crew. In this case, they're on the scene before the journalist who has the press release. But this doesn't prevent the crew from quickly sizing up the situation, and within minutes, the camera is in action.
We don't like fast cars. Slow the traffic down. We don't like fast cars.
Burning an effigy of the relevant government minister provides the all-important vision and almost guarantees a place for the story in the night's bulletin. After the main protest, journalist Peter Beaton finds the group's spokesman for an interview.
Particularly early in the morning, they come through on their way to work and they come back in the evening. We get buses, they move down here pretty sharply, and because it's a wide open street, we get cars coming down, they come around the corner and they just plant their foot and come screaming down the street. It's just very dangerous, and we want something done about it.
And Mr Spike has admitted that the area was inundated with traffic.
Righto. Well, they've had a demonstration. They're not happy about the amount of traffic and the type of traffic they're getting through the street. They've been fairly articulate, and I think they've done pretty well for a small group. There are 20, 25 people here. Normally, that sort of a number wouldn't attract much attention. I think the burning of the effigy will probably guarantee that they'll get at least a mention on TV. That being part of the fact that TV, being a visual medium, demands pictures, demands something to show. If they had simply stood in the street and blocked the thing, I don't think they'd have got a run. It's fairly easy in a situation like this. The person's going to volunteer to talk. There are some situations where you have to go and fish out an interviewee or chase up some official source, that sort of thing. But in a case like this where there's a demonstration, obviously they want to talk to us. That was fairly easy. We'll go on now, having shot an interview and having shot pictures of what they did in the way of demonstration, we'll go on to do a stand-up, which will establish the location. It establishes we had a reporter there and we saw what was happening. There's a credibility point there. And later on, I'll have to go and interview the minister whose effigy they burned.
The story is included in the running list for the night's news and is discussed at the midday news conference.
Kids' protest is kiddies in Fitzroy blocking Queen's Parade for half an hour and burning Peter Spiker in effigy.
It was a kids' protest.
Well, they got the kids out there, yeah. So that is okay. Peter then went across to Noble Park where the inimitable minister himself is doing some traffic thing with some school kids out there. So yeah, that's right. So that should be all right.
Next, the words and pictures need to be fashioned into a carefully timed story. But as Mark O'Brien explains, a lot of this happens on the run.
Well, first of all, out in the field, you've got to make sure you've got all the components of the story. You've got to make sure you've got the newsmaker, you've got the interview, and you've got the shots that you're going to need to put your story together. So really, a lot of your work happens out in the field, and it's when you're in the field, you're framing up what in your mind, what you're going to need to do when you get back here. So you plan the structure of your story, where you're going to have your interview, what shots you're going to use to start with, You plan that out in the field, and when you get back here, the process is you write it. You return to your computer, you write your story, you have that looked at by a producer, and basically you're sent on your way then down to put your voice down. You meet up with a videotape editor, and you'll spend the next hour, hour and a half assembling that 20 minutes or so of tape, however much you've got, and knocking it down to the required format, working with the producer so you know exactly how much time you've got for your story. So it's a fairly protracted process, and often it's under deadline pressure.
And this is how Peter Beaton's story finally appears in the news bulletin.
If Peter Spiker's ears were burning this morning, it's because they were talking about him over in Rushall Crescent, North Fitzroy. Oh, and setting him on fire. The residents say they've had a decade of promises about cutting down rush hour traffic, and now that there's an agreed plan for doing it, the minister won't act, even though the load has doubled since a neighbouring street was closed.
We want a roundabout at McKean Street. We want the street narrowed. We want trees. We want something to slow the traffic down, and we want it now.
Having made their point, the demonstrators gave Rushall Crescent back to the traffic, and true to their word, there was plenty of it. Peter Spiker, who was busy launching a bike safety campaign on the other side of town, isn't taking kindly to being roasted. He says while other areas wait for next year's budget, he's offered Fitzroy $300,000 to get started right now, if the council and residents will only decide what to do first.
No, I feel they've been totally unreasonable, and the end result being that if we can't reach agreement about what ought to be done, there's some other 100 municipalities in the state who are desperate for funds, who'd love to have $300,000.
Peter Beaton, 7 Nightly News.
Simon Cream.
Peter's news story provides a good example of a television news report that we could comment on or analyse. Well, first of all, it's obvious the protest was very much an event organised for the media, and especially for television, chanting children and the dramatic burning of an effigy of a government minister. And the timing of the demonstration was ideal. 8 in the morning gives news crews plenty of time to prepare a story for the evening bulletin. And what about the interview with the spokesman? Only a small part of the interview was actually used in the edited story. Why was that part used? It was probably selected because it was concise and powerful.
We want a roundabout at McKean Street. We want the street narrowed. We want trees. We want something to slow the traffic down, and we want it now.
Something that you might only notice if you watch the report a few times are the expressions on some of the people's faces. Are they really angry protesters, or just there to have some fun? For Peter's stand-up, was the traffic this heavy all the time, or did the crew wait until it looked impressive? Then there's the segment about the minister. Was his bike riding organised just for the benefit of the cameras? It could be argued that the bike riding politician comes out of it all rather well. After all, here he's shown as a friendly sort of person, joining in with the kids. And did you notice who got the all-important last word? Another overall observation, which is common to television news coverage generally, is that we are looking at a report that attempts to condense this issue into a very short time frame. Leaving aside any background information, a 1-hour demonstration has been reduced to just 34 seconds. But don't forget that in that 34 seconds, a great deal of unspoken information is being communicated with the pictures. Things like the kind of suburb it is and the personalities of the people involved. More general criticism of television news comes from Graham Coddington, veteran TV and current affairs journalist and producer of The Late News at Channel 7.
There's a formula in news for covering stories. You know, the classic example is the fire. You know, you see shots of the flames, if there are any, and smoke, and cutaways to red flashing lights on fire engines and firemen holding hoses. I've always had a theory that you needn't go out and cover these fires. You can have a whole file of them in the library, and then when the fire brigade rings, say, OK, this is house fire C, and you pull out the appropriate vision, and then you just fill in the gaps in the script. X number of units attended the fire. It took X amount of time to control. The smoke could be seen from X miles away. So why bother going covering them? In my opinion, you know, television news ought to have gone beyond that. You know, the fire itself is no longer the story. What are the effects of the fire? How many people are out of work because the little factory burnt down? Or what impact has had, you know, the loss of a house had on a family? The story behind the story ought to be what we're looking at, rather than these boring old house fires or, you know, road accidents or, you know, the police round stories generally. I think we put far too much emphasis on them.
A harsher critic of commercial TV news is the ABC's Melbourne News Director, Jock Rankin.
The commercials tend to be parochial. They tend to have up to 70% of their items drawn from within the state where they operate. We tend only to have 30% of our coverage there. We cover more international news than the commercials by and large. We cover more national news than the commercials by and large. So we have a different type of news in the bulletin. We also deal with it at greater length and, I hope, more intelligently. One of the worst examples of an incident, and in the case of television and also in the case of all the newspapers, of pictures dominating the news when there was no issue of any substance whatsoever, was the Ron Casey-Normie Rowe fight on the midday, middle-brow chat show on Channel 9. There was, in my judgment, very little news value in that story. There was a certain amount of entertainment value, and one could look at the spectacle of two middle-aged men resorting to violence when their intellect and their words failed them. Now, Channels 7, 9 and 10 all led with that. I would never have led with that. And in fact, we didn't run the story at all. I would have run it if 9 had given us the footage, but they wouldn't give us the footage. And had they done so, I'd have run it down the bottom of the bulletin as what I call a colour story, saying, isn't this a silly incident between two men behaving in a stupid way? Nothing.
Closely related to the nightly TV news services are the various current affairs programs.
Current affairs is there to enhance the news service, to flesh it out, to put character to the faces that you see on the news. It's also there to break stories, though, to break news, but it breaks it in a longer, more detailed and deeper way. I mean, that's the, I suppose, in an essence, that is the relationship. If you compare it to newspapers, it's like comparing the news pages to the feature pages with a newsy component.
On the ABC's 7:30 report, interviews with politicians about current political issues are a regular feature. But according to Channel 7's controversial current affairs presenter Darren Hinch, the politicians have learnt how to manipulate the media to their own advantage.
I think that the relationship between most news services and most politicians and current affairs programs is unhealthy, because the politicians these days learning television are masters at the 30-second grab. They now can produce them when they want to. With the new Parliament House, the Prime Minister can drive in and out of the executive wing without being door-stopped, in the old famous door-stops with the thrusting microphones. They can get a 30-second grab, they can get it up, and they can sometimes win an election with it. I mean, Bob Hawke's line, one of his early elections, when Malcolm Fraser had said, you've got to put your money under the bed, you might have put your money under the bed. And Hawke said, you can't do that because that's where the communists are. And it became a derisive thing, and Malcolm Fraser became a character of fun to a degree, and the election of '83 was gone.
John Yost agrees that politicians have become skilled in using television, but he suggests that in an interview situation, it doesn't always help.
I can tell when politicians have had media training. I'll give you a military analogy. When they invented the artillery piece, they also invented armour. And then they made bigger artillery pieces to get through the armour. Then they made thicker and better armour to prevent the artillery pieces, etc., etc. So it's an escalating effect. I notice politicians come in and try tricks, new tricks, to try and wriggle out of answering questions, and I sort of adjust my game accordingly. So it's always it's an ever-changing situation. But the truth is, there's not that much room for evading using, you know, little tricks and devices. I mean, really, the best the best weapon a politician can have is a good, keen brain and the capacity to be honest and get away with it, I guess.
With these two current affairs programs, Hinch and the 7:30 report, an analogy can once again be drawn with newspapers. The ABC 7:30 report is close to broadsheet in style, covering more of the main news items of the day, nationally and internationally, in a style that's a bit conservative. By contrast, the Hinch program is tabloid, looking at issues and stories which are more popular and entertaining. Here, the presenter's personality is also an obvious influence in the program. And Darren Hinch hasn't got any delusions about the effect that he can have on public opinion. He maintains that the news media has more influence than most of us recognise. And he's been prepared to use this power in spite of criticism from colleagues and a jail sentence for contempt of court.
I'd always said for years as a newspaper editor that we didn't create public opinion, we reflected it. That was my belief, and I was wrong. I mean, that's just not true. I liked coming back as a young new editor. I like to think that was the case. But in fact, you do and can create, which also carries with it a lot of responsibility.
At 6 o'clock at Channel 7, it's showtime for the news team, and the main performer is the presenter, Jennifer Kite.
It's a very responsible job. It's an enormous task. It's really, at the end of the day, representing the entire news team. And they've worked enormously hard all day putting that bulletin together. It rests on your shoulders at 6 o'clock to present it. And I see my role as really communicating the day's news to people who have been out all day, whether they've been at work or at school, who come in at night and say, well, what's been happening in the world today? Switch on the news, and it's my job to communicate that information. And that is what's important, what's interesting, be it a strike's been called off, or it could be a skiing accident that won't affect people directly but could be interesting. So it's my job to communicate that clearly, precisely, in a credible fashion, looking after myself, being well groomed, and just keeping informed as well. You have to know what you're talking about.
In the studio, Jennifer is the focus of attention, but a good share of the action is happening in the control room, where director Gary Cuttress is in charge.
The control room is full of different people doing different jobs. I've got control of the stories. I remotely roll each of the stories as they go to air. Add the supers. I control the cameramen, making sure they provide the right shots, cue the talent at the right point, and integrate the program as it goes to air.
What's it like sort of having that half an hour during the day when all of a sudden everything's happening and you're on?
Yeah, well, that's the most enjoyable part about it. You've got lots of hours getting ready for the program, but when you're on air, you've got that pump of adrenaline where you can't afford to make a mistake. It's got to be right first time.
The supers that Gary mentioned are the captions, which are superimposed in most news stories. The graphics department is also responsible for the panels used when stories are introduced. These have been generated earlier using a computer system, and they're combined electronically with the images from the studio. The same process is used for the maps which appear behind the weather presenter David Smith. But in the studio, they can't be seen.
Fast-moving cold, dry air across the state.
Another technical aid is the auto cue. It's the system used to scroll the script for the presenter, and because it's right in front of the camera lens, the reader is able to look straight at the viewers.
Well, rain, hail and snow woke Melburnians this morning. Rain-sodden streets were matched only by freezing temperatures and 2 centimetres of snow in the nearby hills. And as Simon Breer reports, school children in the Dandenongs made them.
Because the news is one of the few shows that does go live to air, timing is critical.
It's a half-hour bulletin to the second, and it's also my job to be able to ad-lib in between stories or at the end of the bulletin to make up time or to lose time so that we time out to the exact second. And that's 7 nightly news to the moment. I'll have the late news in Tonight Live at 10:30, so enjoy the sunsets and stay warm. From the team, take care and good night.
Got it. That's everyone. Well done.
Beautiful.
News via television has very possibly become the main way people in our society keep in touch with local and overseas events. In any case, there is no doubt that television is a very popular source of information and entertainment. With that in mind, it is important that when you watch television news or current affairs programs, you have an understanding of how the medium works, and remember that in television there are limitations.
You can get a lot more news into a newspaper.
Pictures are going to have a very large influence.
To get that minute and a half distilled down, it can take all day.
If you've only got 1 minute 10, you have to take it back to its simple form.